This is a story that began with humiliation, but what happened next was far darker. Stay until the end, and if you want more stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. 1872, Pine Hollow, Louisiana. The war had ended 7 years earlier, yet its ruins still bled. The Confederacy was gone, but not the spirit that built it. The great house leaned like a drunkard against the cypress trees, its shutters broken, its columns veined with cracks. Fields once bright with cotton lay strangled by weeds, and the roads were little more than gullies, filled with mud. But what lingered most was not ruin, it was cruelty. Cruelty had survived the war as surely as the moss that wrapped around every oak, and it had found a keeper in Overseer Henry Cole. Clara Johnson, age 40, had known Pine Hollow from birth. Her mother died in its kitchen, her father in its cane fields. She inherited both their burdens, the endless heat of the fire and the bitter taste of labor that never belonged to her. She was the cook, the one who fed even those who mocked her hunger, the one whose hands prepared feasts she never tasted. Time had bent her spine and calloused her palms, but it had not softened her gaze. Beneath her silence burned something that Cole did not see, or refused to see. Every morning began in the dark. Clara rose from a sagging cot in the servant quarters, wrapped her scarred hands in rags, and walked barefoot across the yard. The damp earth clung to her soles. She smelled the smoke of last night's fire, faint and cold, the ghost of flame that would be reborn beneath her hands. By the time the sun spilled over the trees, she had already chopped wood, boiled water, and stoked the kitchen hearth until it roared. The kitchen was her kingdom, yet not her own. The walls sweated with steam, the air stank of grease and ash, and the heavy pots left her arms aching. Each clang of iron was another lash, each rising cloud of steam another reminder of what she endured. When guests came to the Hollow estate, Cole forced her into humiliations carefully staged like theater. He ordered her to serve barefoot before their laughter, her feet black with soot, her apron smeared from the hearth. He made her bow low, presenting dishes with the reverence of a supplicant. If the meat was too tough or the bread too dark, his punishment was swift. He struck her down not with blows alone, but with spectacle. On Sundays, the cruelty was sharpened by piety. He dragged her into the peeling church on the hill, pushed her onto her knees before the congregation. With the white parishioners watching, he commanded her to beg forgiveness for spoiled broth or poorly seasoned stew, as though heaven itself cared for the salt in a pot. Clara, stripped of dignity, repeated the words he demanded, while whispers and titters rippled through the pews. She was not praying to God. She was praying to Cole's appetite for domination. But humiliation did not end at words. When her silence gnawed at him, Cole reached for the kettle. He pressed its scalding mouth against her arm until flesh blistered. "Slow hands," he called her, grinning as the skin peeled. The scars never healed smooth. They raised her skin into ridges, a map of fire she carried like an unwanted tattoo. Cole's cruelty bled into her family. Her younger brother, Eli, worked in the overgrown fields, trying to carve a living wage from soil that no longer obeyed the plow. When Eli demanded coin for his labor, Cole had him dragged into the yard. Before all the workers, he was tied to the post, and the whip sang across his back until his cries dwindled into silence. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands clenched around a wooden spoon, her jaw locked tight. Her niece May fared no better. 16, with bright eyes that still dared to dream of escape, she was sold away under the disguise of apprenticeship. Cole signed the paper with casual strokes, as if it were a recipe. He told the family May was going north to learn sewing, but the truth was plainer. She was gone, her name erased from the household like chalk from a slate. Clara searched the road for her shadow for weeks, but no wagon returned. Even Cole's wife, Martha, joined in the theater of degradation. One evening, when a bowl of soup was served lukewarm, Martha hurled it into Clara's face. Porcelain shards cut her cheek. Hot broth burned her skin. "Good enough for the dogs," Martha sneered, while laughter clattered through the dining room. Clara did not scream. She did not beg. She only touched the blood on her face and went back to the kitchen fire, as if silence itself had become her P*N. The ruined house seemed to echo with such moments, as if the beams themselves remembered every cry, every insult. The plaster flaked like old scabs. The floors creaked like weary bones. Pine Hollow was no longer a plantation in grandeur, but a theater of cruelty, and Clara its unwilling actress. The old estate lived on humiliation as daily bread, and Cole was the hand that broke it. Yet within Clara, silence thickened. It was not submission, nor despair. It was a silence like stone, heavy and unyielding, gathering weight with each insult, each scar, each tear swallowed before it could fall. It grew inside her, hard and quiet, waiting for the day when silence would no longer be enough. Winter 1872 pressed down on Pine Hollow with a damp chill that seemed to rot everything it touched. The cane fields were stubble and mud, the cabins wept with leaks, and the grand house smelled of mildew and smoke. Yet Henry Cole promised spectacle. He wanted a Christmas feast to restore his reputation among neighboring planters, a display of wealth that had long since bled from his accounts. "We'll have hog enough for all," he declared, "and the stew will prove the hollow ain't finished." The workers knew otherwise. They had petitioned for fair wages after harvest, tired of labor that yielded little but hunger. Their demand was met with Cole's whip. Men staggered from the yard with bloodied backs. Women wept as their children clung to them. Whatever fragile hope had flickered was crushed beneath the lash. Clara watched in silence, her eyes as still as coals before flame. For years she had answered cruelty with endurance. But as Christmas approached, her silence changed. It was no longer the silence of survival. It was the silence of decision. In the kitchen, she began to move with a new stillness, her steps measured, her gaze fixed. She hoarded salt in small cloth bundles, set aside herbs under the guise of seasoning, and saved the toughest roots from the garden. She scraped lard into jars and hid them among barrels. Each act was ordinary enough to pass unnoticed, yet together they formed a secret preparation. Cole announced that the Christmas hog would be slaughtered on Christmas Eve, the centerpiece of his feast. The knife would fall at dawn, and by nightfall the meat would simmer in Clara's pots. To the Coles and their guests, it would be proof of survival, proof of mastery. To Clara, it was something else entirely. The quarters buzzed with whispers after the failed wage uprising. Some spoke of leaving, of drifting down river to find mills or rail camps that hired freely. Others muttered of vengeance, but had no strength left to act. Clara said nothing. Her silence was heavier than their words. A stone dropped into still water that spread unseen ripples. She remembered Eli's floggings, May's sale. The bowl Martha had shattered across her face. She remembered Cole forcing her to kneel in church, her burned arms trembling beneath the gaze of smug parishioners. Each memory was a thread, and together they wove a single garment of resolve. She would serve the feast he demanded, but its flavor would not be his own. On the night of the workers' short-lived rebellion, Cole vanished into the dark. No one saw where he went, though rumors spread like sparks, that he had fled to warn the sheriff, that he stalked the roads with his pistol, that he was drunk and lost among the cane fields. While shouts and groans echoed faintly across the hollow, Clara remained in the kitchen. The firelight flickered across her face, calm as stone, her hands steady as they stirred the bubbling pot. The air was thick with smoke and spice. She chopped onions with rhythmic precision, each strike of the knife echoing like a heartbeat. She added garlic, sage, crushed peppers dried on the hearth. The aroma filled the kitchen, mingling with the smell of pork fat sizzling in the pan. To anyone watching, she was a cook preparing a holiday meal. But within that stew, hidden between salt and savor, lay something heavier, something that did not belong to the hog. In the corner, the Cole children, Ben, 12, and Ruth, 9, sat huddled near the fire. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, not from hunger but from fear. They had watched their father break men in the yard, watched their mother sneer at suffering. They had learned early that silence was safer than truth. Clara ladled broth into wooden bowls and set them before the children. "Take strength," she whispered, her voice low, almost tender. The words seemed meant for them, yet her eyes fixed briefly on Martha, who hovered nearby in her silk shawl. To Martha alone she added, softly enough that no one else could hear, "Take strength from the one who spent his life stealing it." Martha's face blanched, her lips tightening, but she said nothing. Around them, the house filled with guests, neighbors from failing estates, a few city officials hungry for free meat, men in worn coats trying to prove they still mattered. Laughter rang false, the sound of glass raised to dying fortunes. None noticed the tension in Martha's posture, nor the calm certainty in Clara's movements. The stew simmered all night, its fragrance masking the bitterness folded into its depths. Clara never sat, never closed her eyes. She stirred with the patience of a clock, as if waiting for some hidden hour. The windows glowed faintly with lantern light, the air hummed with the groans of distant workers, but inside the kitchen there was only the slow rhythm of her spoon, the steady beat of her silence. By dawn, the hog's carcass had been stripped bare, the pots heavy with meat and broth. The table was laid with bread, pies, and cider, the feast Cole had promised. But he himself had not returned. His chair at the head of the table remained empty, a shadow over the gathering. Guests muttered about business or hunting trips, but none pressed too hard. The food was rich, the stew steaming, and hunger dulled suspicion. Clara moved among them with quiet grace, placing bowls before each guest, her eyes lowered yet unblinking. To them she was still the cook, the servant, the silent woman who had endured too much to matter. They never saw the weight in her silence, nor the judgment in her gaze. The children ate first. Ben lifted his spoon with a shaking hand. Ruth's lips quivered before she took her first sip. Martha watched, pale and rigid, her fingers tight around her napkin. She alone understood the meaning of Clara's whispered words, though she dared not speak them aloud. To admit fear before the officials and neighbors would mean disgrace, scandal, ruin. And so she smiled faintly, her face stiff, while her heart hammered like a trapped bird. The feast went on. Laughter returned, glasses clinked, meat was carved. The guests praised Clara's cooking, called it proof that Pine Hollow still lived. But in the quiet corners of the room, in the spaces between words, something else was present. Reckoning, stirred into every bowl, hidden beneath the salt and spice. And Clara, calm as stone, stood by the hearth. She had given them what they asked for, a Christmas meal. But it carried more than meat. It carried memory, humiliation, and silence sharpened into judgment. The Christmas table of Pine Hollow gleamed with false grandeur. Candles burned low in tarnished silver holders, their wax dripping onto cracked mahogany. The guests, planters, parish deacons, and 2 county officials, sat in their finest coats, though most were patched at the seams. Their voices filled the hall with forced cheer. Each laugh too loud, each boast too desperate. They clung to the ritual of feast, as though ritual itself could stitch their world back together. At the center of the table steamed Clara's stew. Thick, rich, dark as soil after rain. The aroma curled through the hall. drowning the mildew stench of the old house. Clara moved among them with her ladle, her silence steady, her back straight. She placed bowls in front of each guest with the same deliberate grace she had learned across decades of servitude. Not a word escaped her lips. When she reached the children, Ben and Ruth, she lingered. Their small hands trembled as they clutched their spoons. Leaning close, she whispered words too soft for others to hear. "Take strength from the one who spent his life stealing it." The whisper slid like a knife into Martha's ears. Martha's face turned ashen, her smile frozen tight. She clutched her napkin until her knuckles whitened. The officials at her side noticed nothing. They were too busy praising the feast, declaring it proof that Pine Hollow had not fallen. Only Martha heard the undertone. Only she felt the cold certainty that passed between Clara's lips and her children's ears. The meal began with the scrape of spoons. Guests sighed as the first taste reached their tongues, savory, spiced, satisfying. Laughter followed, talk of old battles, lost fortunes, new ventures. The officials boasted of rebuilding the county, of roads to be paved and debts to be forgiven. They spoke as if the South were rising again, blind to the rot in their own rafters. Guilty, they said. The word fell heavy, but the heavy had long since happened. The gallows were raised in the square, the rope of pale moths wing against morning. Townspeople gathered because spectacle is its own hunger. Peddlers sold ginger cakes. Children climbed wagon wheels. A preacher begged for repentance. Clara stood straight in an old calico, hair wrapped, face unadorned, asked for last words. She studied the crowd the way a cook studies a slow boil. "You eat what you make," she said. "You always did." When the plank dropped, some swore the wind changed. Others swore the church bell tolled though no hand pulled the rope. The sheriff called it weather. People who knew better called it memory, doing what the law would not. The coals did not recover. Henry's ledger turned up in a pawn shop, greasy with thumbprints, every page stained by figures that could not be redeemed. He died nameless in a bunkhouse upriver, pistol rusted shut. Martha's winter was a long hallway of closed doors. Families took tea with her, but not a second cup. Ben grew into a man who never asked for a refill. Ruth married a clerk who slept with candles lit. Their children avoided kitchens, as if the smell of onions could summon the past. The laws tightened, then tightened again. But fear leaked through the seams. In New Iberia, a magistrate banned nutmeg for its foreign scent. In Opelousas, a widow insisted on tasting every dish from the same spoon as the cooks, a ritual she called prudence and others called confession. In Bayou Teche, a planter ate only bread for a month and still dreamed of stew. And the name, her name, spread, not shouted, not printed with honor, but carried in palms and whispers. Clara Johnson, in cane rows and laundry yards, in railroad camps and river kitchens. People spoke it like flint against steel. Mothers told daughters, "Mind the fire, mind your hands, remember Clara." Old men spat and said the county could hang a body, but not a lesson. Some claimed you could hear a soft stirring in empty houses, the sound of a wooden spoon circling a pot that wasn't there. Years later, Pine Hollow collapsed under summer storms. Vines swallowed the veranda. Wasps built their small empires in the eaves. But the kitchen hearth outlasted the roof. Hunters passing at dusk found warm ash where there should have been none, a circle of heat as neat as a kept promise. One boy swore he saw a woman's shadow move through the ruin, barefoot, unbowed, carrying nothing but time. He would not step over the threshold. He tipped his cap to air and walked a long way home. The newspapers forgot her. The law remembered only its own shape. Yet the cabins did not forget. They kept her in small ways. A pinch of salt thrown over the left shoulder. A pot stirred counterclockwise when grief was near. A story told low when the youngest finally fell asleep. Not a saint, not a witch. A cook who turned humiliation into a blade and served it without raising her voice. So the coals abandoned Pine Hollow in disgrace. The statutes multiplied like weeds. But in the places where bread is broken and labor breathes, her name endured, less a word than an instruction. When the kettle hums, when the spoon circles, when the fire answers the hand, people still say it under their breath, a warning and a benediction. Clara, remember us as we remember you. After Clara's hanging, after Samuel's noose, after Louise's disappearance, after Esther's poisons, after Phyllis's axe, Southern towns began to whisper of a new fear. Not of spices, not of herbs. Worse, of flesh. Stories spread. On a Mississippi plantation, the master vanished. Servants swore he had gone to the fields, but never returned. The next evening his family ate roast, praising its flavor. Only later, when guests fell sick, did they find barrels of bones in the cellar. On the wall, someone had carved, "You ate your own." In Alabama, an overseer was found dead, stripped of skin. Days later, stew was served at the big house. Guests called it wild boar. A doctor later saw human teeth, still clinging to one rib. The newspapers cried devilry. In the cabins, slaves whispered, "Let them fear every bite." In Louisiana, a cook served her mistress a pie filled not with fruit, but with the liver of her own husband, the man who whipped slaves to death. Neighbors swore they heard the mistress scream when she realized the taste, before falling silent forever. From then on, people feared not just the kitchen but the garden too, as if every tree could bear fruit grown from blood. In Georgia, a whole family gathered for Christmas. Candles, prayers, fine dishes. Stew was brought out, thick and heavy. As the guests ate, a slave boy stood in the corner, staring. One guest asked, "What meat is this?" The boy smiled. "From what you left us." That night the guests clawed at their stomachs, while bones crackled in the fire, bones that had not yet been cooked. The rumors multiplied. The newspapers spoke of African savagery, of cannibal fear. But deep down, everyone knew this was not savagery. This was memory. This was reply. Masters no longer feared only poison or the knife. They feared the plate before them. Every soup might hold the flesh of a neighbor. Every pie, a piece of their own blood. Fear changed the houses. Many hired Irish cooks instead of trusting their slaves. At feasts, whites demanded that another white taste the food first. Mistresses cooked meat themselves, trembling at knives once held by black hands. But it was already too late. The stories lived their own life. In the cabins, children heard their elders whisper, "They eat us every day. Let them taste themselves once." And fear grew stronger than the whip. Not spices, not stitches, not silent poisons, but bones in barrels, liver in pies, flesh on the fork. And every time a master lifted a spoon to his lips, he thought he heard the whisper drifting out of the kitchen, "You eat what you have become."